Varesa's early access videos are up on Bilibili, meaning her numbers and everything with her kit is now public. So in today's video, we'll be using this information to calculate and analyze Varesa's best teams, builds, and overall strength in the meta. Let's get started. So, Varesa's kit is very wordy and pretty confusing to read, but in reality, the kit is pretty simple, so I'll summarize the gist of what you need to know without all the extra fluff. Varesa is an electro DPS with gameplay that revolves around quickly cycling between her skill, charged attack, plunge attack, and burst. How this plays out is, her skill allows her to instantly perform a charged attack without charging or consuming stamina, and her charged attack then launches her into the air so that she can follow up with a plunge. She gains Night Soul points during this, and once full, she enters the Fiery Passion state, which enhances all of her abilities and increases their damage, with her plunge attacks in particular getting a large buff from her A1 passive. After performing a plunge attack during Fiery Passion, Varesa's Night Soul points are consumed, and she now gets a special version of her burst that ignores its cooldown and costs only 30 energy, and this special burst will basically be another strong plunge attack, which doesn't have a 5-star burst animation, thus it can be cast very quickly. She does have a regular 70 cast burst with the burst animation, but it's basically never worth using over the 30 cast burst. So put simply, Varesa's gameplay loop consists of repeating the same combo shown on screen here. Cast her skill, press the auto attack button to use her instant charged attack, press auto attack again to plunge. Do the same combo again, but this time cast your special burst after the plunge. This combo can be done several times because Varesa's skill has 2 charges at a baseline, and she gains a charge each time she enters Fiery Passion. You'll generally be casting the skill, charged, and plunge attack 5 times per rotation, and the special burst 2 times. Done correctly, this should take about 11 seconds of field time. You can combo a bit further beyond than that, but if you do, your cooldowns will be all messed up for the second rotation, so it's not advised to do that unless you know you won't be needing another rotation. That's the gist of what you need to know about Varesa. The wording of her kit is confusing and complicated, but the actual gameplay loop is pretty simple and straightforward. But now that we know how to play Varesa, let's look into her best teams and how strong they should be. As an attack scaling Electro DPS, it should come as no surprise that Chevres is a fantastic buffer for Varesa. In an overload team for Varesa, you want an off-field Pyro to refresh the buffs from Chevres, as well as a second Electro to battery Varesa, since she'll encounter pretty bad energy issues without one. What should be the strongest overload team is, as you've probably guessed, Varesa, Chevres, Mavrika, and Iansan. Mavrika provides great AoE sub DPS damage and a decent damage bonus buff, while Iansan provides massive buffing that Varesa gets max value and uptime out of. Mavrika will even get Iansan's buff on her burst, which is where most of her damage comes from. And overall, the team is looking to be very strong, reaching around 112,000 DPS, which is some of the highest in the entire game, higher than even the other Natlan DPS, not including Mavrika. If you don't have Mavrika available, Xiangling can be used instead. Xiangling will snapshot the attack buffs from Yansan, so her damage will be very close to a C0R0 Mavrika's here, and may actually be higher if you're able to get more than 12 Pyronado spins. However, Xiangling's 20-second cooldown does not align with the rotation time, so you'll likely need to skip her burst every other rotation, relying on Grow Buff or R-Field Pyro in those rotations. Another way you can play Overload is by using Auroran instead of Yansan. Auroran is definitely not as good as Yansan here, since he provides less buffing, but he is still the next best option, doing good AoE sub DPS damage of his own, and allowing shorter 15-second rotations, as long as you skip Mavrika's burst every other rotation. Doing this, the overall team DPS is not far behind using Yansan, but the total damage per rotation will be, which will become more and more noticeable the more investment you have in the team. But Chevres overload teams aren't the only optimal way to play Varesa, since Electro is a very versatile DPS element, so another strong way you can play her is using Furina and Xianyun. If using these two, for the second Electro, I would highly recommend Iansan over Auroran, as your rotations will pretty much never be shorter than 20 seconds due to Xianyun's cooldown, and shorter rotations are one of the main things that made Auroran competitive in the other team. With this team, assuming Furina and Xianyun are both C0, the team DPS is actually much lower than Overload though, sitting at about 91,000. Along with that, There were some noteworthy practical issues, such as the resistance shred of VV falling off in multi-wave while Chevres doesn't, and also Xianyun's buff being single target, so your actual AoE DPS will be lower than that 91,000. So the Overload team should definitely be both a lot stronger and a lot more practical. However, Furina and Xianyun's Constellations can greatly raise the ceiling of this team. Once you have both Furina and Xianyun at C2, then this becomes stronger than Overload, although it's still not that much stronger, and still has the same practical issues which Overload does not, so I really wouldn't recommend using this team if you have the Overload teammates available. And lastly, there's one more team archetype that looks pretty promising for Varesa, which is Aggravate. I haven't seen many people talk about Aggravate Varesa, as she doesn't have any EM scalings, and her high attack scalings don't bode the best for Aggravate, but she does seem to have pretty high frequency of Electro application, so she gets a ton of Aggravates, and unlike the other two teams, you can actually use a shield here, which you may find valuable since if Varesa gets staggered out of her skill or charged attack, you'll miss out on an entire plunge. The team for this would be Varesa, Kirara at C4 or higher, Xianyun, and either Auroron or Yansan. Kirara is recommended over Nahida not only for the shield, but also because Nahida's 2U Dendro can make it hard for Xianyun to crystallize Electro, and Kirara's fill time works better for the rotation times, plus Nahida is kind of difficult to use on multi-wave. The rotation times is also why you wouldn't use Baizu here, as cooldowns force 20-second rotations, which you do not want. Xianyun is recommended over an Anemo unit here. Because of the way her Night Soul burst works, it allows Varesa to easily get 2 stacks for a 135% attack buff, rather than just 1, so that's an extra 35% attack you otherwise wouldn't have. Note that since Auroron or Yansan is on the team, and you already use Scroll, Xianyun should be on Petra while they are on Scroll. Now surprisingly, as the second Electro here, Auroron results in higher DPS than Yansan. His electric induction procs have no ICD, so they can all aggravate, and he's being buffed by Xianyun and Petra, giving him very high sub-DPS damage in this team, plus shorter rotations than Yansan. This ends up being the same 91,000 DPS as the Furina Xianyun team, but without the practical issues, and the added benefit of a shield, so if you aren't playing Overload, Aggravate should be your next best option, unless your Furina and Xianyun are constellated or you don't have a C4 Kirara. Those are the 3 main teams I recommend for Varesa, so let's now look into how to build her. For artifacts, you should always be using either Long Knight's Oath or Obsidian Codex. Because Varesa doesn't consume Night Soul until her second plunge, she spends quite an amount of time without having gained the 40 crit rate from Codex yet, plus she's constantly entering and exiting Night Soul Blessing, so all of her damage doesn't get the 15 damage bonus from it. As a result, Codex should be about 10% behind Long Knight's Oath. You can still use Codex if you don't want to farm the new set, just know that you are leaving damage on the table if you do. And the main stats, you want Attack, Electro, Crit. However, because of how much damage bonus Varesa gets if you're using Long Knight's Oath, an Attack Goblet is only about 2 to 5% behind Electro depending on the team, so if you have a really good Attack Goblet, feel free to use it. If you're playing Aggravate, an EM Sans is about 6% behind Attack, so it's usable, but you do still ultimately want Attack instead. And then for substats, it's the usual, prioritize energy recharge until you have enough to constantly use your 30 cost burst, then crit, then attack. And for how much ER you should build, it's going to depend on the number of Favonius weapons on the team, but generally speaking, it should range between 110 to 130%. As for Varesa's weapons, her signature Vivid Notions is more than a 20% increase over every other option, with all the other options such as Tome, Lost Prayers, Witsith, and Cashflow all being pretty similar to each other. But while Vivid Notions is a big increase, it's worth knowing if it's better to go for it or Varesa's Constellations, so let's look at the Constellations now. Varesa's C1 makes it so that her plunges gain the full 180% added attack multiplier from her passive, rather than just the 50%, regardless if she's in Fiery Passion or not, and she'll also gain this on her burst plunges now, whereas before those would never get it. This results in an 11% damage increase over C0, which is pretty strong, but not all that great by modern DPS standards. However, this constellation plays a huge role in what makes C2 so strong. What this C2 does is, Varesa will now enter Apex Drive after all of her plunges, even if she wasn't in Fiery Passion. What that means is, Instead of having to do her combo twice before getting the special burst plunge, you now get it every single time you do this combo. So you now go from using the burst plunge twice to 5 times. And because of C1, all 5 of those have that extra 180% attack scaling. So your new combo of 5 skill, CA Plunge Burst, is a massive increase to your total multipliers dealt over a rotation. Using the burst so many more times would require a lot more energy, but that is also covered by this constellation, as it makes Varesa gain 11.5 energy after every single plunge. This includes the burst plunge itself, so you're recovering 23 energy per plunge, basically now having a 7 cast burst. Overall, this is about a 35% increase over C1, which is absolutely massive, one of the strongest C2s in the entire game. This will be the ideal early stopping point. C3 then increases her burst by 3 levels, which is ideal since at this point the burst talent is the largest source of her damage, so C3 is about a 7% increase. C4 gives buffs to Veresa's burst depending on which version you used. The 30 cast burst now gains an extra 100 damage bonus, resulting in a 14% damage increase. C5 increases the auto attack talent level by 3, but at this point the vast majority of your damage is coming from burst, so this is only a 5% increase. And then C6 is kinda silly. You now gain 30 energy every time you enter Apex Drive, which is in addition to the energy refund already gained from C2. This is very excessive and shouldn't really matter much, but in addition to that, the C6 also gives 10 crit rate and 100 crit damage for a large 37% increase. So overall from C0 to C6, Varesa gains over 160% increased damage, which is some of the highest in the game for an on-field DPS. But should you pull for them? If pulling for Varesa's Constellations, Eon-san is on her banner, so you'll be able to pick up the Constellations on her at the same time. And unless your luck is really bad, you should be able to get C6 Eon-san alongside C2 Varesa. Since Eon-san is such a great support for Varesa, this will be excellent value for your Primo Gems, completing half of your team with the same pulls. Additionally, because Farazan and Gaming were on Xianyun's first banner, and Xianyun is running alongside Varesa, there's a good chance those two might show up on this banner as well. So in addition to picking up Yanzan's Constellations, you'd be picking up Constellations on 2 more of the best 4-star units in the game. Thus, there is excellent value in pulling Varesa's Constellations, so if you have the resources, I do highly recommend going for C2 Varesa and prioritizing this over her weapon. But that concludes everything you need to know about building and playing Varesa, so what are my overall thoughts on her? She is looking to have some of the highest single target in the game, while also being able to push her damage output even higher in the first rotation, which should make it a lot easier for her to reach thresholds to one-rotate bosses than a lot of other characters. She should even be able to get some collision plunges, taking her single target further beyond still. In addition to the single target, she's a plunge DPS, so she naturally has good AoE. I'm not sure if she has regular plunge AoE or the enhanced AoE that Zhao, Gaming, and Ito have. If the latter, then both Varesa's single target and AoE are so good that she's without question part of the top 5 DPS, with a very good argument for the second best behind Mavrika. But I will be sure to test her and give my updated opinion after her release. And if you liked today's video, please be sure to like and subscribe and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks and goodbye.